because he couldn't convince Europeans that America was something other than a putrid and degenerated natural ecology. Jefferson was obsessed with the nature and ecology. His only published book is filled with mundane statistics about the length of rivers and the different flora and fauna that define the New World. But he was particularly obsessed with convincing the Europeans that animal life in America was in fact larger and more strong than animal life in Europe. No one believed him. And so finally he launched an extraordinary quest to take the body of an American moose and carry it to Paris. And in his house, in the entryway, he had erected this moose, this American moose, to convince everyone how powerful and different and strong this new creature was. This story is told in this fantastic book by David Close called In Search of Jefferson. And after he brought this moose to Paris and showed the Parisians what this animal was like, he wrote to the most severe critic of life in America to show him that he needed to come and see the moose. He wanted to show the difference, not explain it anymore. And that's the first story. This is the second. In 1927, Aldous Huxley wrote an article in which he stated as follows: in the days before machinery, men and women who wanted to amuse themselves were compelled in their humble way to be artists. Now they sit still and permit professionals to entertain them by the aid of machinery. It is difficult to believe that general artistic culture can flourish in this atmosphere of passivity. Now, this very same idea was expressed about 15 years before by this man, John Philip Sousa, who said these talking machines are going to ruin the artistic development of music in this country. Sousa was speaking here at the United States Capitol. He was talking about this, the phonograph. These talking machines, he said. He said, when I was a boy, in front of every house in the summer evening, you would find young people together, singing the song of the day or the old song. Today you hear these infernal machines going night and day. We will not have a vocal cord left, Sousa said. The vocal cord will be eliminated by a process of evolution, as was the tale of man when he came from the ape. Now this is a picture I want you to focus on. Picture of young people together singing the songs of the day of the old song. This is a picture of culture. We could call it, using modern computer terminology, a kind of read-write culture. It's a culture where people participate in the creation or the recreation of their culture. In that sense, it's read-write. And Sousa's fear was that we would lose the capacity to engage in this read-write creativity because of these, quote, infernal machines. They would take it away, displace it, and in its place, we have the opposite of read-write creativity, what you could call, using modern computer terminology, a kind of read-only culture. A culture where creativity was consumed, but the consumer was not the creator. A culture in this sense that's top down, where the vocal cords of the millions of ordinary people have been lost. You know, if we look back at the 20th century, at least in what we call the, quote, developed world, it's hard not to conclude that Johnson and Sousa was right. Never before in the history of human culture had its production become as concentrated. Never before had it become as professionalized. Never before had creativity of the ordinary creator been as effectively displaced because of these, quote, infernal machines. The 20th century is the century that gave us the only culture, unlike every century before, leaving open the question of what the centuries to come will look like. That's the second story. Here's the final story. In 1919, the United States launched itself on an extraordinary experiment. Voted dry means that the United States passed an amendment to the Constitution to ban the sale of intoxicating alcohol. They launched a war against an obvious evil, the dependence upon alcohol, a dependence which progressives and feminists of the day thought would only be stopped if we could ban the production and sale of intoxicating alcohol. 10 years later, it was pretty clear to anyone who observed this objectively that this war was failing. All across the United States, there was an explosion of illegal activity fighting prohibition. And in 1929, the authorities began a new series of techniques to fight back against those who resisted prohibition. To fight back, to capture, and to destroy illegal alcohol using a new technology, what was referred to and still is as the, quote, wiretap. And an important Supreme Court case addressing the question of wiretap was focused on this man, a man named Roy Olmsted, and 11 others who were arrested because of evidence produced through a wiretap. In the Supreme Court case of Olmsted versus the United States, the court had to address the question whether this evidence gathered across telephone lines using a wiretap was legal, because this evidence was gathered without any authorization by a judge. There was no warrant for that evidence to be gathered. Well, the Supreme Court turned to this document, the Constitution of the United States, in particular the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, which guarantees that the right of the people, actually it was a little bit more like that, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, against unreasonable searches and seizures. And the question was whether this wiretap was an unreasonable search or seizure. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice William Howard Taft, said that the Fourth Amendment was originally designed to protect against trespassing, crossing onto someone else's property. But wiretapping involves no trespass. The police didn't enter into the house of Mr. Olmsted to attach the wires. They attached the wires to his telephone line after they left the house. So there was no trespass, and therefore the court concluded there was no violation of the Fourth Amendment. Police were free to wiretap without any judicial review because it didn't violate the original purpose of the Fourth Amendment. But Justice Louis Brandeis dissented from that opinion. He said the Fourth Amendment stood for a principle. The objective of this principle was to protect against a certain kind of invasion, to protect privacy. And how you protect privacy, Brandeis said, depends upon the technology of the day. And as time, work changes in that technology, that means that we have to translate full protection into a new concept. And in that case, Brandeis lost. He was in dissent. The wiretap won. But though the wiretap won, the war against illegal alcohol was increasingly a failure. And in 1933, the United States finally fully recognized this failure. They saw the increasing cost from this war, the rise in organized crime, the fall in civil rights, and they saw the vanishing benefits from this war, because it turned out everyone was drinking, prohibition notwithstanding. And what they realized was that the costs of this war were outweighing any possible benefits. So in 1933, prohibition was canceled, peace was declared in the form of an amendment to the Constitution that repealed the 18th Amendment, thereby allowing states once again to legalize the sale of alcohol. But what was not repealed was the aim to fight the dependence on alcohol. What was repealed was the idea of using